Good evening. My name is Mary Dollar, and I'm a member of the Glastonbury Abbey Institute. And we are here tonight to listen to Dr. Charles Mundhenk give us a presentation entitled, Where Did You Go, Joe DiMaggio? Finding Hope in Dark Times. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. If you're here in the center, please silence your cell phones. You knew that one was coming. Also, we would appreciate if you would hold your questions until the end. And at that time, if you have a question for Dr. Mundhenk, please raise your hand and Kathy Mundhenk will come to you with the microphone. If you are at home, please use the chat function only if you have technical difficulties or if you wish to make a comment. Kathy Kiesel is monitoring the chat function and she will respond to whatever you may have to put in there. As far as the Q&A pod goes, please put your questions into the Q&A pod. And we suggest that you put your questions in as you think of them. And we have Bonnie DeLay, who is monitoring the Q&A pod, and she will be able to present your questions to Dr. Mundhenk. And now for our presentation. Dr. Charles Mundhenk has been a practicing psychologist since 1981, and he was president of the Mar Vista Psychological Association until it closed in 2023. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Mundhenk.
Well, good evening. Thank you guys for being here and investing the next hour and a half of your time. I hope that you'll find it useful. Just by way of explanation about the program, I'm going to take three different periods of time in the recent American history, World War II, and then late 60s, early 70s, and now the current 2010s to 2025. What we find in a lot of these, in all of these areas, is all of them were dark times. All of them were difficult times. And frequently what they did is they looked back kind of nostalgically to the previous period. The 40s looked to the 30s. The 60s were looking to the 50s and early 60s. And now we hear and see that it's still looking back to return us to the 50s and 60s. What we find with a lot of these issues is the nostalgia doesn't work well. You know, it's kind of like going to a high school reunion. There's a reason we haven't seen these people or talked to these people in 25 or 50 years. So it's nice to come back and it's like, oh yeah, and then so that's part of it. So a number of people along the way have asked me, why the topic? Why this title? And part of it, well, major part is again the nostalgia. This song, for those of you who are of a certain age, was from the movie Mrs. Robinson, The Graduate, and the song was Mrs. Robinson. And so it was written by Simon and Garfunkel in the late 60s, which was a dark period, reminiscing about the nostalgia of the 40s and the romance of the 40s. So what we're going to do is, that's me. So we're going to talk about, so where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? The next line in it, or two lines, our nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Where have you gone, this Jolton, where have you gone, what's that you say, Mrs. Robinson? Jolton Joe has left and gone away. So looking back and hoping for that simpler time, that better time, we find that, oops, that time has passed. And so how do we deal with what's going on now? So I want to just do a basic kind of brief history of each of these periods, the 40s and 50s. What was the cost? You know, when I was doing research on this and I looked it up, it's like, wow, those numbers are crazy. So the 40s and 50s, 75 million people, civilian and military, died in World War II. 420,000 American servicemen died in that time, and 14 million people died in camps. You know, a lot of times we get stuck on, oh, 6 million Jews. Well, that was 6 million Jews, but there were all sorts of other people who also died in that during that time. So those are horrific numbers. Those are things that during that time, you know, we had to endure all sorts of stuff. And you heard the greatest generation. These people were the greatest generation, and don't disagree that what they went through, what they experienced, what they did in that time was amazing. And so my parents were born in 1913 and 1915. So they were toddlers at the end of World War I, the war to end all wars. They were teenagers in the Great Depression. My father went off to war in 1941. And in those days, you went for the duration. So he was gone for 4 years. And if anybody saw, what was it, 6888 or 6888, this movie that is on Netflix. And it was about this division of women who had to figure out how to send the mail. No mail was getting back and forth. Nobody was hearing anything in the States, and all those letters that were sent to the soldiers weren't getting there either. So it was 4 years of isolation and silence and fear. And so what happened? And then obviously the Holocaust and nuclear bombs. That's a lot to pack into 30 years. You know, again, my dad was born in 2015. In 1945, he came back. 30 years, they experienced all of that. So what happened with that generation? What was the societal response? What did people do with all of that stuff? Denial, silence, desire to forget. It was too painful to deal with, too hard to look at. So they kind of tried to step away from it. You saw it in a lot of the music. Forget your troubles. Come on, get happy. Put on a happy face. Now, there are going to be a lot of songs tonight. I promise I won't sing. You're welcome. But I bet you some of those songs are going to kind of stick in your head as time goes on. So put on a happy face. You know, forget your troubles. Come on, get happy. Let your smile be your umbrella. Even singing in the rain. I'm singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling. I'm happy again. And so what happened a lot of times with families in the 40s, they started families. They had been through all of this difficult stuff. A lot of the movies, you see people smoking and drinking and dancing and celebrating, but they weren't dealing with a lot of the hard stuff. And so they just moved on. So, but there was a need for heroes. They went through all of the stuff. They needed heroes. They needed to figure out what this would be. And so they couldn't talk. There was probably 10 or more years before there was anything really written or movies about the war. And so they turned to baseball. Baseball, and again, kind of a, not regression, but in going back to a simpler time. The soldiers who went through what they went through, were thinking it kind of brought them back to their youth, and it was simpler. So their heroes were frequently the baseball players, and they had these great names, Joltin' Joe, the Splendid Splinter, Yankee Clipper, Say Hey Willie. There was a pitcher who came up from the Negro Leagues not long after Jackie Robinson. His name was Satchel Paige, and he was kind of a early Yogi Berra. Yogi is another one, but he was kind of an early Yogi Berra, and one of his expressions is, "Don't look back; they might be gaining on you." And so there was this period where people just didn't want to look at that. And so I grew up with a lot of silencing phrases. I would suspect that possibly you guys did as well. Things like, offer it up. There'll be more about that later. But be strong for that one. I'll tell you a little story that impacted on me. So that my brother went off to college. I was in 8th grade. And so my grandparents were babysitting for us while my parents took my brother to school. And so great. So we're doing our thing. They're off at school. And I'm going upstairs to tell my grandfather that I'm going to see my girlfriend. such as you have in 8th grade. And so I go upstairs and there's my grandfather dead. And it's like, holy. So I had, I checked his pulse, I checked his breathing. It was like, not being her today. So I went downstairs and I talked to my sister and I said, Margaret, there's something wrong with grandpa and I don't think he's sleeping. I couldn't even say the word. And so then she comes up and it's like, oh, well, we got to wake up Aunt Jenny. Aunt Jenny was my grandmother's sister, who ICE would have had her shipped back to County Sligo in a heartbeat. But she lived with us forever. And so she came in and she's going, John, wake up, nothing. And then she goes, you have to be strong for your grandma. And I said, I'm freaking out here. I just discovered a person, so it's like, but I have to be strong. So, so we got aunts and uncles to show up and, come, and it's like, okay. So I just ended up kind of going over and sitting in a corner because I had to be strong. I couldn't break down. I couldn't let down. I had to be strong for grandma. So that was one of it was his or her time. Couldn't he have waited a week till my parents got back? It's like, what's going on? But no, he couldn't. It was God's will. I'm not questioning that part. And then it's over. Time to move on. No sense crying over spilled milk. So again, we had to move on. We were silenced. And the difficulty with silencing phrases is it tells us don't feel that way. And for a lot of people, that don't feel that way message gets you angry because I do feel that way. And so how come I can't do anything with this? What's going on? Why not? Why isn't this permitted? Because you have to be strong, because it's God's will, because whatever. But so it didn't make sense. And so what did we do with that when the 60s came? So I don't know if anybody's eyes are going a little bit you have a little post-traumatic type stuff, but anyhow, so the 60s and 70s, we grew up in an era where there was silence, and so the problem was in the mid 60s, late 60s, we said, we don't want to do that anymore. There was too much other stuff going on. There were assassinations, JFK, MLK, RFK, Malcolm X, just to name a few. There were all of these assassinations, and the world was literally and figuratively on fire. There was social upheaval, civil rights, segregation, integration, so there were cross burnings, there were draft card burnings, there were bra burnings, there were all sorts of things burning, because we were tired of being silent. We couldn't resolve what we were seeing and with what we were being told. And so there was this need to speak up. There was this need to say, I don't want to play anymore. And again, Vietnam, that era television was much more prominent. Every night you saw Vietnam. Every day in the newspapers, there were body counts. There were, we're doing such a great job winning this war. Napalm. Vietnam was on fire. And so it was kind of also a difference with Vietnam is with World War II and the bombing of Pearl Harbor, people were driven to go. With Vietnam, because there were so many other things going on, it was so unfortunate for many of the soldiers who went because they were treated poorly when they returned. Now, and then difficulties in my sophomore year in college, the draft was instituted. They were having difficulties getting people. And what I knew earlier was when I was a kid, not a kid, but when I was a teenager or young adult, a lot of the people I knew from not my neighborhood necessarily, but the schools that I knew, that a lot of people were given the choice to either go to jail or go to Nam. Tough choice, but frequently. So you had a very different level of military, both because of what was going on socially and what was going on within the war and what was going on within society in general. And so what happened was so the generational issue, sex, drugs, rock and roll, everything changed. It was like this cataclysmic kind of thing occurred and I in my time, it was pretty much my sophomore year, middle of my sophomore year. My sister was 2 years older. She was a senior in college. She didn't see any of this. But with that, we had strikes, shut down universities. There was sex was, again, a way of rebellion. I'm not gonna go with all those old rules. I'm gonna do this, free love, all of that kind of stuff. Drugs were everywhere. And rock and roll had changed. The Everly Brothers, sorry, see you later, Kingston Trio, and all sorts of other people came in and I'll talk about that in a second. And then there was Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary was described by Richard Nixon as the most dangerous person in America. Pot calling the kettle black? I don't know, maybe. But one of his phrases was, tune in, turn on, drop out. He was attributed to, drug culture. But really what he meant by that phrase was tune in to your essence, tune into who you are as a person. Turn on your individuality, turn on your capabilities, and drop out of conventionality. And so, but he suggested sometimes that LSD would not be a bad way to do that. So he lost some level of credibility, but that was the point of that statement was different. So the next thing that's changing is the media. Media changed dramatically in the 60s. It was a big deal in the 50s to have a TV. Wow, TV. And so we had maybe 5 or 6 stations that went off at midnight. So the availability of information wasn't great, but it was there. And again, we saw the war unfold in front of us. We saw all sorts of things unfold in a daily basis. That even looks like an old TV, don't you think? It's kind of nice and square. So these forms of media were ascending. TV became more influential. Even radio, cars, AM, FM radios were options. And AM radio was very music, and FM radio was barely existent. So Marshall McLuhan wrote a book called, or he was famous for his expression, the medium is the message. And so what he talked about was it's not so much what you're seeing, but what these mediums, various forms of medium, are doing within the context of the population, of how the messages are delivered. And that was 1964, but it's current today because cell phones have changed. That medium has changed how we message, how we talk, how we think, how all sorts of levels of communication have changed. So, and he also talked about there's subliminal suggestion was also something that they thought that if they implanted pictures within a movie or within something of like Pepsi, and you'd say, I'm kind of thirsty. You wouldn't see it. It would just be there and then gone. But the idea of a subliminal suggestion was to get you to do certain things. Product placement is another thing they talked about, put things in the TV that it's like, oh, that's something. So it wasn't advertising, but they paid for it to get product placement, to get you to think about what they were doing. So there was a tremendous amount of influence that was going on then within the context of media. For those of you who remember, and probably nobody but me does, there was a movie called Network. Network was in 1976. Faye Dunaway, who you probably heard of, or Peter Finch were main actors in it. And it was about a failing TV station, and this guy, Peter Finch, was the anchor. And so they wanted to fire him. And so his solution initially was, well, I'm going to commit suicide on screen. He decided that wasn't a great idea. So he's going, and now he's there and he says, you know what? I'm going to have an editorial. I'm going to say this thing. And so he's there and he's doing his editorial and he says, I want you guys, you know, he's broadcasting to the public and he says, I want you guys to go to your windows, throw up your windows and yell as loud as you can, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And then the scene shows that all of these people, all of these windows all over the city, people are yelling, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. There was a tremendous amount of anger in the 60s and 70s. And so that kind of pointed it up. All in the family, we all know Archie, right? We remember Archie. So again, part of this thing is, do you remember what Archie called his son-in-law? Meathead, right? Kind term, huh? And what did he say to his wife? I'm sorry? Stifle yourself, Edith. Exactly. I mean, so think about that. Silence. If you're saying something I don't want, stifle yourself, Edith. Ralph Cramden in The Honeymooners said, to the moon, Alice. You know, so there were all of these things in terms of what happened with all of the, you know, all of the anger, all of this stuff. And so again, we had the Everly Brothers, we had KT3, Kingston Trio, we had all sorts of other things. And so now, late 60s, music changed dramatically. Beach Boys were hanging on to the Good Vibrations and California Girls. They wanted to do with that, and they obviously it worked. Beatles went from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Lucy in the Sky with Diamond, LSD. Then there are Dylan and Crosby, Stills and Nash, Simon and Garfunkel, Peter, Paul and Mary, all folk singers, all a lot of messages about what was going on in society at that point. A lot of anti-war type stuff. Motown came up, hard rock, acid rock. So it was all of this stuff that my parents couldn't figure out. Why are you listening to that stuff? It's like, because we like it. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't, but it was something that separated us from. Now, the difficulties with that separating from them, where did that word? Oh, yeah, here we go. What changed was Woodstock. Woodstock. Let's hear it for Woodstock. So here's I don't know if you, I'm in the way. Okay, so that's a poster from Woodstock. Behind me it says an Aquarian production. If you remember back that far, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And so, and one of the or two of the lines, and it says, where the moon, peace. Yes, and the love will steer the stars. And so the idea is finding peace and love. We're talked a lot about peace, love, and happiness, but there was first anger. There was all of this fighting, and then we're looking to find peace because the fighting doesn't work. The hate doesn't work. How do we find peace? How do we find love to steer the stars? And so Crosby, Stills and Nash wrote a song. Woodstock was the name of the song. And it was, by the time we got to Woodstock, we were 500,000 strong. Everywhere there was a song and a celebration. We've got to get ourselves back to the garden. Madison Square Garden, Boston Garden, or maybe the Garden of Eden, where it's simpler and there's forgiveness and kindness. And that's, again, part of what they were looking for with this was how do we find our way, because we had lost it. So we were moving from silence to a desire for change, but towards more of a connection, more of acceptance that was enormously important for all of us at all times. Make love, not war. We often saw pictures of, people with rifles and women putting daisies in the barrels of guns. There was an effort to move away from that, to move from all of that, but it came with a cost. There's always a cost of change. All growth is painful. And so for us to grow, to go through the grief process, we had to go through, and we'll talk about in a little bit, what the anger, bargaining, depression part. The people in the 40s went from, and I'll talk about Kubler-Ross in a second, but we went from denial to acceptance. The middle three stages are anger, bargaining, depression. So we were dealing with anger and then working towards bargaining and then a level of depression, because the idealization that we had hoped for didn't occur, but maybe there was a path for everybody. Billy Joel in the late 80s wrote a song, "We Didn't Start the Fire." And so, again, it was always burning since the world's been turning. That's what we forget. We're in the middle of this time that's very dark, but there have been dark times again and again and again. And so, but it's, what do we do with those dark times? So they say, we didn't light it, but we tried to fight it. And when we're gone, it will still go on and on and on. So conflict is there. Dark times will be there. It's what do we do with the chaos and the hard times and the pain that goes along with it? Because again, growth and change is often painful. So the question becomes, what do we do with all of these difficult times? With all of these difficult, how do we manage the challenges that exist? So that's the teens in the 70s. Now we're in our era. And the difficulty in thinking about this is we kind of hit a perfect storm with the teens and the 20s, with COVID and the political climate and the digital age. Because, so we'll talk about each one separately. Political climate, we all know that there's a great deal of mistrust and galvanized positions, isolation, disconnection. That's what we're dealing with today. Because I'm who I am, anybody know the 2024 Merriam-Webster Dictionary Word of the Year? Polarization. And Murthy, who was a former Surgeon General under the previous administration, had said that when a community is weak, we're more easily divided, polarized, and turned against one another. So I did this picture, one, because I want Jeff Domenico to be jealous with this balloon arch, but he can't do that. So separation and coming together, because that's what we're here about, is learning how to come together. Most of the hard stuff of tonight, bad news of tonight, is behind us now, and we can talk more about how do we come together. So intolerance, hatred, and fear of differences, that poisons hope. We see that all the time. That's why all you guys are here. That's why we wanted to have this topic. And coming together, demonstrations, parades, town halls, social, civic organizations, church, athletic events, anything, it brings us together for a common purpose. And that's the antidote to the poison of all of this other stuff. The reason I picked this picture as well is, you probably can't read it, but the banner in front says PMC Children's Ride. And so this is a ride kids do that, for whatever distance it is. And you can see there's a whole group of kids all in red, and parents and supporters and everybody are back behind it. And they're there for the same reason. They're there to help. I've done probably 30 or 40 century rides. These 100-mile bike rides are 2-day, 180-mile rides. And in various parts of the world, it's all the same. I've done in the Pyrenees, it's the same as Lake Tahoe. Here, I do the MS ride from Boston to P-Town. And we're all there for a common purpose. We're all like-minded people. And so when you're riding, it's not, we don't want to win. I say I go anywhere for free food, so along the way I get free food. But the idea is, if somebody has a breakdown, you need some help. If somebody's at the side of the road, what do you need? How can we do this? If they crash, you stop. We know what to do. And we will do that because it's a common purpose. It's like-minded people doing things with and for other people. And that's the antidote. So we no longer feel powerless and alone when we're doing something, anything, to join something. So COVID, the second leg of this three-legged stool, and you'll see benches along the way. She's on a bench, and it's not Penny Capolka. But she's on a bench, and she's masked up, and she's with her backpack. I don't know if she's waiting for a bus, if she's watching her kids playing in a playground. She's certainly not interacting with anybody. Again, the silence that we endured with COVID. You're masked up, hard to talk, hard to hear. And there was fear and isolation. There was mistrust and uncertainty. We didn't know what to believe. I had a number of clients along the way who worked in healthcare, and they say they would come home, go into the garage, take their clothes off, put it immediately into the washing machine because they were afraid. They didn't want to infect anybody. We didn't know if we could trust medical science. We didn't know if we could trust the people who were telling us stuff. We didn't know. We didn't know where we got it from and what it would do for us or what it would do to us. So there was a tremendous amount of fear and uncertainty, and those changes in normal daily life. I don't have to tell you that the physical contact changed, social interaction. I really kind of wonder, like if I were dating during COVID, after a date, you say, "Could I give you a fist bump? Good night." It's like, how did you connect? There was all this distance, social distancing. You would have to be, 6 feet apart. That was okay. No. Cough, sneezes, go 12 feet. Okay, we got to go further. We got to, we had to do therapy with our windows open and all sorts of stuff. All of these things that maybe this will help, and maybe this will help. There was emotional and social development was impacted dramatically. When COVID occurred, the initial part where it was most disquieting, all of my grandkids were in high school. My oldest one, no senior prom. There was no junior prom and then no senior prom. Graduation was families drove up, got out of the car, they took the family picture, and you drove away. So it's like, wow, nice tradition. But what also happened with all of these kids going forward is they missed a lot of the developmental markers, the developmental things that had to happen with teenage. When teenagers are together, they talk, they connect, they judge, they rank down, they do all sorts of stuff, but then you figure it out. And so what we saw and what we're seeing now less of, because people are back in school more time, but a lot of these kids' developmental stages were kind of attenuated. They were stopped a little bit because they didn't try and fail and figure out, oh, that's how cool kids act, so I'm going to act like a cool kid. Well, that doesn't feel really good, so I'm going to try to do this. And, oh, these are the right clothes, or we didn't have any of that. And so what happens if we try and fail, we learn. And so it's, in shrink terms, we call it the approach avoid. So you either approach something, and if you approach something, you learn something about it. You either, oh, I don't like it, or I do like it, but they didn't have that opportunity to approach avoid. So then it becomes a place where I don't know how to do that. Now I'm 18 or 20, and I don't know how to date. I don't know how to do all of these things, but I'm supposed to. So it creates there's this whole group of people, then a lot of research shows that they're dealing with tremendous amount of anxiety because they haven't been able to move forward. And I mean, they're moving forward, but they're delayed. And, I still see it in my grandkids that there's a level of delay for them that it's like, yeah, they should have done that at 16 or 18. But and as a result of lack of confidence comes with competence. And so if you don't feel competent, if you don't feel that you can do certain things, or you don't feel comfortable with it, many times we avoid. But if then we're feeling like we're lagging and we're not living up to certain expectations, we become depressed. And then that becomes another thing of isolation and separation. And what do we do with that? So Zoom and FaceTime, amazing. Look, we got it. We're doing Zoom. Zoom's a good thing. But it's how much of that? Back, you know, 5 years ago, that's how we survived. That's what we did. And so, I mean, again, it's a good way of communicating. It's a good way of connecting, but it shouldn't be the only way because we get a false sense of things. FaceTime, a lot of times people call it fake time because what do you show on FaceTime? Do you show people fighting? Do you show people at funerals? No, it's weddings, it's vacations. Did you see the breakfast I had today? You know, it's showing all of the great stuff. And then, but the rest of our life are things that we need to look at. And if we're living in a 6-inch screen, and I did a lot of couples work in my practice, and I hated doing FaceTime couples because many times there were high conflict. They needed space, but no, to be on the screen, they had to sit together. And they were talking to me, not to each other. And so that was a very difficult thing for them to work through anything because they couldn't get the space that they needed. And I couldn't see what was going on below their shoulders. And many times that's an important part in the process. So celebrations and deaths were alone. We didn't get to say goodbye to people. People died, million people, I think, more than 1 million people died, and you didn't get to say goodbye. And you didn't get to be with them. And that's important for them, but it was also for the survivors. It's important to be able to say goodbye and to connect. And I remember my 70th birthday that my daughter drove by, the kids were standing out of the sunroof. They had a big box that was decorated, and it's like, oh, happy birthday. You know? And then I don't know, a week or so later, we had a birthday celebration, and one family sat there, one family sat there, one family sat there outdoors. So it's like, okay, where are the hugs, where are the kisses, where are the highs, you know? So, I mean, it was just a lonely, separate time, and some of that residue still remains. So we became increasingly aware of our social, emotional, and physical fragility. We live the world in denial. We live in denial. That's not a bad thing. You know, we all know we have an expiration date. I'm not thinking about it. You know, we know it's coming, but we don't want to think about it right now. And so we were reminded in a very difficult way. And now digital age. Digital age, again, cell phones, can't live with them, can't live without them. What do you think of that picture? You got 5 kids sitting on a bench. They look happy. They're all smiling. They're all having a good time. They're all alone. They're looking at their phones, having a great time. They're not connecting next to one another and no interaction. And so again, cell phones are great, but if the last thing you caress at night and the first thing you reach for in the morning is your cell phone, your life's going in the wrong direction. You know, it's like, so we get the algorithms that are set up on cell phones draw us in. We want to see what we missed, what's going on. News cycles are 24/7. And the difficulty with that is, and that goes back to that's why it's kind of a perfect storm with the political climate, is there's so much news out there that people are drawn to things that work for them, things that make sense to them. So they watch them and they listen to that. And is there misinformation? Probably. And so what happens is more and more we get drawn into these areas of separateness in terms of finding a way of connecting. So mobile phone, it's amazing to me. College students are on their phones 6 hours a day. 16 to 18-year-olds are on their phones 8 hours a day. So if you multiply that by a week, they're doing overtime. They're working full-time and they're overtime, 56 hours a week. And adults typically don't get out an hour a day. They're in the house other than that, an hour a day. And so they miss the connection. And so too much of, again, cell phones are really amazingly important. We live on our phones. You know, we have all our information on our phones. We can look up all sorts of data, all sorts of stuff. But again, the medium is the message. We have we're not as, we don't critically think in the same way. We don't look towards things, we just find them. And in terms of the internet, same kind of thing. In the internet, or well, cell phone first is kind of like an adult pacifier. When we're bored, when we're lonely, when we're tired, we reach for our phone and it makes us feel better. We got to find other ways of doing it. And so the internet, again, we can't live without it. It's what is at this point information all over. It's really important, but the again, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT is probably the widest searched of all chat apps, whatever. Grok is with what's it, Elon Musk's stuff. Bible chat is a Christian again, a AI thing. Hallow is a Catholic AI information. And that was one of the most, it was the most downloaded the app last year for a period of time. More than ChatGPT, more than Grok, all of that. People, in many cases, younger people are looking, and this may be their first introduction to religion. And so they're looking for something, they're looking to connect with something. But the difficulty is you ask a question and it gives you an answer. You don't struggle with it. It's just, it gives you an answer. AI is used to answer questions for entertainment, research, social connection, dating, advice, even therapy. So you're not struggling with many of the issues that we should struggle if we're people of faith to try to figure this out. We ask a question, it tells us that. And AI is kind of a cyber yes person. We will ask it a question and it will tell us what the answer is. It will tell us this is what you're looking for. And so, again, good news if you're doing research, good news if you're working for an organization and you want to bring things together, but bad in certain ways and dangerous in certain ways. And they're recently, I don't know if people have heard about it or not, but there's some wrongful death suits going on at this particular point against AI, because one example that just came up this past week was this adolescent boy was on AI for therapy. He was talking to whoever his chat person was, not person, but this bot was, and asking it questions. And most of the answers were pretty good and most of the answers were on target. But then he starts saying, I'm really worried. I don't know if I should tell my parents. And because AI is a yes person, they said, no, you probably shouldn't tell your parents that, that would make you feel guilty or whatever, because they're telling you that. So it's like, okay, well, I'm really feeling lousy. I'm thinking about suicide. Well, these are the ways you can commit suicide. And he did. And so that's the danger. It's a great tool. All of these tools are wonderful, but they have to be managed. And the difficulty a lot of times with a lot of laws is that they chase technology. These things happen. Again, using a bot for therapy, again, saves you copays, I guess, but doesn't necessarily give you the direction that you need. Oh, wrong button. Okay, now I screwed it up. Yeah, speaking of technology, I hit this arrow, not that arrow. Yeah, just want to get out of that. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so, the common factors of these dark times, of these three eras, is silence. And silence, the sounds of silence, another Simon & Garfunkel song, one of their phrases in it is, silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words and I might teach you. Take my hand and I might reach you, but my words like silent raindrops fell and echoed in the well of silence. And so So that's the danger. And so we become isolated and there's loss. Because we want to connect. Human nature wants to connect. But I did it again.
All you have to do is just tap it somewhere else on the screen. Just hit your mouse and it'll go away.
Okay, magic. He's good. We're keeping it. Okay. So the next, I mentioned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross before, and my hand goes over here. So grief is a requiem for love. It's a monument for losses that we can't bear to lose. The level of grief we have is directly related to the level of importance of a relationship. And so a lot of times people will talk about, I just lost this relationship, my loved one, whatever. I can't get into another relationship. It hurt too much. Of course it did, because it mattered. So if you insulate yourself, if you go from, don't do that. If you go from the first 5 stages, if you go from denial, we're going to be together forever. I kid about my wife and I walking up Mount Kilimanjaro on our 100th birthday and dying together there. Probably not, but that's denial. And then they go to acceptance. Well, can't do anything about it, so it's over. Let's go on. So we have to go through those middle 3 stages. We have to go through anger, bargaining, depression. It's really important. And the thing about anger, bargaining, depression is we do it frequently. We have to go through it over and over and over again, not because we're going to feel good and acceptance, but because it finally fits. And the single most curative factor in grief is to talk about it, to talk about this person, your experience with this person. Because if we go to denial, then they kind of die again. We can't talk about it. We can't talk, it hurt too much. We don't want to talk about, how they lost their wife or their son or daughter or any of that, because we don't want to upset them. It's important to talk about it, because then they go through this process, they go through the pain, and then that person is much more alive to them going forward. Going through this whole process is what you need to do. And so the only way out of it is through it. You can't jump to the end. It's kind of like reading the last chapter of the book. You need the character develop in the middle. And so then there was a guy, David Kessler, who helped Elizabeth Kubler-Ross with her death process. And he came up with a 6th stage, and that's meaning, finding meaning to the relationship. So did we find meaning to what happened in the 70s? I hope so. Do we find meaning to the loss of a loved one? And you see, after all sorts of events that have occurred, many times people will start funds, scholarship funds, memorials in some way to their loved one, because then their life has some meaning, or their life that ended short has meaning. And they can say, okay, we can point to that their legacy goes on. And legacy isn't about dollars and cents. It's about how we're remembered, and how, in talking about all of these things, all of these dark times, that's why we're here tonight, to talk about this, to come to a level of acceptance and understanding of meaning. So where do we find hope? That's why we're here, right? Took us a long time to get it, but we did it. So hope is nothing else but the constancy of faith. It's believing that there's hope. Somebody in this room said the next thing. The foundation of hope is faith. You know that guy? And so then there's the religious basis, and these are things, the belief that God loves us and will never abandon us. That's Pope Francis. You're going to hear a lot from him tonight, so you'll be patient. So in Psalm 91, it's be with me, Lord, when I'm in trouble. Knowing that there's somebody there. A song we often sing at church is, there's a longing, be near, hear my prayer, O Lord. That we're talking somewhere, we're connecting in some way to a need. We're talking to, and knowing we're not alone, that we're loved and will be safe. The spiritual basis is not necessarily, prayer driven or any of those kinds of things, but it is. but people can be spiritual without attending church. So, story of Robbie, Charlie, and John. Full disclosure, I'm Charlie. So anyhow, this story goes that 1952, I'll start it off with me. 1952, it's Halloween. We're living in Brooklyn. Everybody was born in Brooklyn, I think. So we were in Brooklyn, and I'm in a lot of pain. I'm a year and a half old. I can't really tell my parents what's going on. We lived across the street from the doctor, but it was Halloween, no car. Where's the doctor? So she kept looking and looking and looking. Finally, she realized, oh, it's Halloween. The car is around back, and so you don't have to deal with trick-or-treaters. So she brought me there. My appendix had ruptured. They couldn't send me back to Detroit, so they sent me to a hospital instead. I was septic, had to be transfused multiple times, I believe. Several weeks in the hospital, I came out. So then the next year, 1952, my brother John is born, and December, nice day out, kind of like today. He's out living, out in his carriage. My parents come out. He had died. He had SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. So the story of the family was that Christmas Eve, they're sitting in Wygan Funeral Home. Nobody's there because everybody's celebrating with their family. And then my brother, because he's 4 years older than I, he felt like he got left out. So he got bone cancer the next year. And so he had a bone removed from his leg. He's fine. He's doing great. But so in terms of this, it's like, I wouldn't be able to get up in the morning with this. And a lot of times people, when this much happens, they say, why is God doing this to me? They turn away from the church. Why me? My parents, for whatever reason, turned to the church. They found stability. They found stability in the edifice. They found comfort in the prayer and the rituals. They found community within the congregation and support from the clergy. It was a perfect place for them and for us as a family. So we were protected. We were held, in the arms of the church. And so prayer, we did a lot of that. I was the third glorious, sorrowful, and joyful mystery. There were 5 of us. We prayed the rosary every night. My mother never met a novena she didn't like. And I served as an altar boy every day in Lent. 6:30 Mass before going to school. That was offer it up. That was definitely offer it up. So, but our prayer life was really service. It was much more helping people who had a need, So we had my great Aunt Jenny, you heard about her. My Uncle Tommy lived with us. My Uncle John lived with us for years. It wasn't just they came for a weekend. They were there because they needed it. And the Thanksgiving table, who knew would be there? Two Thanksgivings, we had the Notre Dame Glee Club because my brother went to Notre Dame. He was in the Glee Club. They were on Ed Sullivan for Thanksgiving, so they came to our house for Thanksgiving dinner. And my mom asked that they sing for their supper, and that's all they had to do. So, St. Ignatius of Loyola said, teach us to be generous, good Lord. Teach us, I can't read that, you're missing a word there, to do as you deserve, to give and to not count the cost, to fight and to heed, to fight and to not heed the wounds, to toil and to not seek rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward save that of knowing that we do your will. That was what my parents did. That's how we grew up. That it was one of service. So St. Ignatius Loyola talked about Iglesia Militante, the militant church, soldiers of Christ. And he asked of the Society of Jesus members to show himself to be ready to reconcile the estranged, to compassionately assist and serve those who are in need, and to perform other works of charity according to what seemed to be expedient and for the glory of God. and the common good. And so that was often our prayer. So now we have, where do we find faith? First, faith in self. And when I used this picture as an image, Kathy goes, that printing's kind of out of focus. It's like, yep, supposed to be. Because many times it's unclear, how do we trust ourselves? How do we learn to trust? And again, for many of the kids growing up, learning to trust themselves is hard because they're in self-psychology, they talk about a real self, an ideal self, and a self-concept. And when all three, our self-concept is how we see ourselves, real self is how other people see us, and our ideal self is who we aspire to be. We do best if they're all close. When they're separate, we don't have a lot of faith in ourselves, and then it's hard to acknowledge that there's something bigger because we're afraid to acknowledge that we're afraid, to know what all this means. So how do we find something bigger? It can be church, it can be service, it can be nature, team, family, something that matters, that it's not just about us. We need to know that there's something more. And so faith in others is really hard if we don't have faith in ourselves. It's really hard because how do we trust we have to trust ourselves to have the strength to allow vulnerability. I often corrupt the word intimacy to into me see. And so we have to trust who we are if we're going to allow somebody to see into who we are. And so having faith in others, we also need the ability to discern. Because if somebody says, oh, you ever go buy a new car or you're on the islands and there's a timeshare sale, they love you until you're not interested. So wait a second, what's my real self? They don't like me or they do like me. We have to know that what we're doing and how we're doing it matters. So this thing, fear, where you turn off immediately, that's a void. We're just too afraid. We don't try stuff. Our amygdala, which is our brain's center that addresses threat, we turn off. With good self-esteem, ideally, we trust who we are, we trust the lessons we have, we trust and we move forward. And generally, but most times, there should be a level of fear within a relationship. We need to be critical consumers of the people we're involved with. We need to think about what they're saying and what they're offering and how that works for us. And many times in relationships, what the promise is or what we know initially works, and then one or the other kind of outgrows it. So many times, again, I did a lot of couples work and people say, oh, I failed at my marriage. Did they fail, or did they grow to a certain point where another person, they weren't prepared to move forward? They kind of moved off on fear, and the other person wanted to continue to grow or to change. And so learning to trust yourself, learning to trust others. And I was checking this earlier today, and I said to Kathy, I said, oops, I left out a word. She goes, what do you mean, like or the? I said, no, it's an important one. It was alone. So Pope Francis, he's back again. No one saves themselves is what I had. And I said, no, that's not right. That's not the quote. And that doesn't sound very hopeful. No one saves themselves. So his quote is, no one saves themselves alone. We need others. We need to connect. How do we get there? If you remember in the old days, the phone company, reach out and touch someone. That's what that said to me. So we're going to have different quotes on hope. Dante, just because we got to start somewhere, said, abandon all hope, ye who enter here, the sign over the gates of hell. Not my first choice. Second one is the most difficult thing that is to hope. The easiest is to despair. And this is the great temptation. So that's where a lot of people are struggling right now. Is like, is this ever going to end? What do I do? Do I give up? Do I become passive? Do I just quit? And so no man is an island entirely to himself. There's no full identity without belonging to people. We have this endless need. And For those of you who live in the Hingham area, driving around town, you see these signs out of some of the churches. We are hope. Hope is here. Do they have a secret formula? Or is it just, again, come here, let's connect, become a community, do something that we can be together. And there was the youth jubilee in July, early August, and there was a young Korean kid who was being interviewed, and it's like religion brings people together. And they were terming the youth jubilee as the Catholic Woodstock. More than 500,000 people there to celebrate their connection. So another bench. And this one, people are connecting. We don't know what they're saying, but you can see one is trying to talk or communicate, and the other one is trying to understand. And that's what we need. With God through prayer, formal or informal. You know, obviously the Abbey has a rich worshiping schedule. They have mass daily, they have prayer various times during the day. So there we can get our fill of formal prayer, but there are also benches. We're back to benches. There are benches all over the ground, and you can pray by yourself, just by being in a space. There are benches up by the columbarium. There are places where we can be and connect with ourselves, with people, with friends, with God, with others. It's really important to figure out connecting with others. We've been isolated too long. This COVID thing, and I know a lot of people say, oh, I go to Florida, but I really can't talk about things down there. I can't say this, or I go, you know, and there's, again, this knowledge that we have to be separate, and connecting is really important. I'm going to try to quote you correctly, and it may be totally wrong, but in his recent homily, he said that when we die, the only thing we take with us is the love we gave. Was that pretty close? Okay. And so, again, connecting, live with others. There are studies with Baylor University and Boston University who said that people who have rich, interactive lives tend to live longer and better and happier lives. And connecting in nature. Again, the benches around here. I often say, anybody who knows me has heard me say multiple times, nature is my cathedral, that I will go into the woods. One of my favorite things to do is go to national parks and just be with the silence. Just be there, and the enormity and the immensity and the power I find very humbling and bringing me closer to a spiritual connection. Community. Be part of something, anything. A pickleball league. You know, it doesn't have to be great stuff, but you have people to talk with. There was a woman the other day, after Mass, she was saying, you know, I was a lifelong Democrat. You know who you are. And I had to join. That word gave me chills. I had to join. She was doing something. She was taking control. She was moving forward in a way of connecting with the community. Lauren Jackson writes a newsletter, Believing, and she revealed that individuals need to seek meaningful connection. And so then another article in this after that was Believing and Belonging, and she talked about how all sorts of people responded to her newsletter. And she said, this is a quote from her, not my thing, but she said, from radical left people to MAGA bros, doctors, professors, blue collar workers, all of these people were saying they really have a need to be part of something, to connect with people. And in Believing and Belonging, he also talked about what religion provides. And she called them the 3 Bs, the beliefs about the world and behaviors to live by, but belonging to a common community and a culture. And so this belonging, again, is part of the theme that we need. How do we belong? How do we connect? And what she said is many of the people who were responding to this had fallen away from religion and had, because of whatever struggles they had gone through in childhood or the constrictions of that. But they found that being part of a community, she said that people told her they knew what to do in a crisis. They knew how to be there for you, to listen to you, to help you, to support you. And that is an enormously important thing if we're to hope, is to connect. There's an inverse relationship, which I found interesting, between meaning in people's lives and the nation's GDP. Yeah. And so I thought about it a little bit. And so we're in a fairly affluent community, and the difficulty is many times these people are human doings or human havings, not human beings. They're on the race to get more, to do more, to have more experiences, bigger cars. The one who has the most toys when they die wins. Yeah, I don't think so. And so people with lower GDP, they have to live in community. They support one another. They know their group. And that's what they aspire to, that connection, that support that's available. So courage is an interesting thing. That's part of community. That's part of connecting. But to have courage, I don't know if you can read this, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather than the judgment that something else is more important than fear. We have to have courage. We have to take risks. If we're to connect with people, we have to take risks. Risks are important to gain information, to gain relationships. And it results, unfortunately, in inevitable loss. Because if we take the risks, we find a good relationship and we find a good thing, they may move away. Ultimately, one partner dies. And so we have to not worry about the end, but connect in the present, connect with each other, and not worry about the loss. Know that it's going to be there. Know that it's going to be very painful. But the reason, again, it's so painful is because there was so much good that you experienced. So you have this short period of loss and maybe a long history of remembrance and a long history of shared experiences that if you shut it down, you don't have. So hope is the force. He is back again, Pope Francis. Hope is the force, living in this present with courage and with the capacity to look towards the future. So nostalgia is nice, but hope is in our future. Hope is we have to look forward to. So Kathy had asked me to explain urbi and orbi. Urbi is urban, or his letter to Rome, and orbi is also to the world. It was the Pope's blessing, the Easter blessing of this past year, right before he died. And so hope does not disappoint. That hope is not an evasion, but a challenge. It does not delude, but empowers. On this day, Easter, I would like to hope anew and to revive our trust in others, to include others who are different from ourselves and who come from distant lands, bringing unfamiliar customs, ways of life and ideas, for we are all children of God. And finally, he said, the light of Easter impels us to break down the barriers that create division, are fraught with grave political and economic consequences. It impels us to care for one another, to increase our mutual solidarity, to work for the integral development of each human being. That was his address this past year, just before he died. And so you can't see, I can't see, no, nobody can see it. It's a secret. The word that nobody can see is esperar. Esperar is a Spanish verb, and it means to hope and to wait. Kind of interesting that these conflicting word, definition for the same word. And hope is really, it's a virtue of movement. It's a dynamic to change. It's always evolving. It's something that we need to work towards and for, and it's interactive. We find hope with others. We're given hope from doctors or friends and neighbors. It can't be done in isolation. We have to connect. We have to be together, and that's so we don't wait. It's more the dynamism that all of us have, but we have to find. We have to find a way to connect. There's one more thing. that we're going to give out a poem, and I'd like all of us to read it together. When you have it, Kathy's going to hand some things out. Oh, and her able assistant. Take one and pass it back. You know that. It's coming. It's I know, that's why I got these guys. Everybody have it? Okay. Okay, we're going to read it. I'd like us all to be able to read it out loud together. So it's strength and courage. It takes strength to be certain. It takes courage to have doubt. It takes strength to fit in. It takes courage to stand out. It takes strength to share a friend's pain. It takes courage to show it and deal with it. It takes strength to stand guard. It takes courage to let down your guard. It takes strength to conquer. It takes to surrender. Strength to endure abuses. It takes courage to stop them. It takes strength to stand alone. It takes strength to stand alone. It takes courage to lean on a friend. It takes strength to love. It takes courage to be loved. It takes strength to survive. It takes courage to live. May you find strength and courage in everything you do. And may your life be filled with friendship and love. So that concludes the program. I think I went over. I know I went over, but so now I guess it's time for questions and answers.
We're going to start with questions first from the online audience, and we have two questions. The teens around me all sit next to each other like that and giggle at their own TikTok reels they're scrolling through. They occasionally show each other, but otherwise don't communicate with words, just giggles and reactions and quick eye contact. I guess it's just a comment on the picture of the kids,
Yeah.
the 5 kids. Oh, what does your T-shirt say?
My T-shirt said, I'm supposed to take this off before. My T-shirt, it's another Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song, and it says, "If you smile at me, I will understand. It is something everyone, everywhere does in the same language." And so that's what my T-shirt says. In response to that, I think the difficulty is, and people are finding that we need to limit cell use. We have to. And so people, now say, instead of, your keys go in the basket if you're drinking, now your cell phone goes in the basket and we can talk. Or children need to, say our neighbor has a 14-year-old kid, same kind of thing. And they say, well, he needs to earn his time on the phone, meaning doing chores or doing other kinds of things. He needs to participate in social events and family events and those kinds of things. And then he can go and play his video games or do other things. But the only place freedom comes before responsibility is in the dictionary. And so that's a freedom. And they need to figure out how to responsibly connect with people and how to responsibly connect with society, because where I can be a 17-year-old girl on the internet. So we're looking at all sorts of things that aren't necessarily real, and they're not learning how to take social cues and do things. So having and again, schools have figured out that when you deny kids their phones in school, their grades go up. Surprise, surprise. So so having a certain amount of time where they have access to the phone, not taking it away, but more, you can have this, but it's a responsibility. And so you need to show us that you can handle the responsibility before you have to.
So Charlie, thank you. That was great. Thank you
Thank you.
very much. So believe it or not, for a number of summers, I was head of maintenance at Situate Harbor Yacht Club. And I didn't know how to do anything, but I could delegate really well. And I would always have a group of kids for my team. You know, I would have like 4 or 5 kids. And I always planned their breaks on the same time so they could all sit together.
Mhm.
And over the years, they made great friendships and had a great time together until one year, they all came with cell phones. And I walked into where they're having their break and they weren't talking to each other at all.
Right? It was
They were
silent.
all on their phones and
Yeah.
they never connected
Right.
that whole summer.
Right.
So I was really brought back to that summer. It was such a startling turn of events,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and so again, cell phones are incredibly valuable, but they need to be managed. All of the things, all of the freedoms we have are good, but finding the balance, finding that thing, and like you said, then we become alienated, then we become separate. Right here.
And this, you mentioned the alienation, polarization, sense of separation, need for community coming together. It seems like your whole lecture, we've seen that a lot of that distilled in the last couple of weeks after the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yep.
And the outpouring of it, somewhat polarization, somewhat getting some people pulling together. I'm wondering if you feel that ties in any way, or if so how.
Well, yeah, I think I had a feeling that some question related to that would come up, and yes, the hard part, again, it was an assassination of Charlie Kirk. And so somebody is missing a husband and some 2 children are growing up without a parent. And so we need to memorialize that or validate that that's an important loss and people came together for that. But the difficulty, I think, with the assassination initially is that people, again, kids who go on the internet often become radicalized. Often with AI, again, they give you the answer you're looking for, so then you find that. And so now there are these people, and yes, all of these people, for many of these people who went to this stadium, they needed to connect in their grief, which is a good thing. They needed to, hear and talk about whatever they were going through. But the difficulty is, as you said, there's a level of polarization, there's a level of separateness. It wasn't an intentional exclusion. I think it's a societal problem that's going on right now that causes the separation. And what would have been better is if we could say this person who was assassinated by somebody who dove into some level of radicalization and did that. And it's not us against them, but it's a loss for everyone. Is that?
I can't remember since then an assassination has had this kind of, I'll call it cultural and political impact.
Right.
That we have been torn apart in polarization in ways that, culturally, there's uniformity. When I was young, 60, people had the same social values.
Mhm.
They're
Yep.
pretty consistent with what the Catholic values are
Yep.
today. And now half the country still has them, half the country doesn't have them.
Yeah.
And that's part of the polarization. Part of the polarization, I'm sure you get this isolation of everyone in their own little, like this I don't know, this Discord they're talking about, the killer was, I don't know what Discord is, but they go into these places that I would consider, maybe a lot of us consider negative on the internet, but they're young, they don't know yet.
Right.
Um,
Or they're seeking that out and then they kind of go more towards that.
yeah,
Um,
and you pointed out, that's tragic that
It is.
someone gets sucked into that and then
Yep.
really loses their soul. And
Yep.
hopefully, you know,
Yeah.
get forgiveness for that.
Because if you think about, again, back in the 60s and 70s, we didn't have cell phones. That's 2000s. We didn't have answering machines. So if you're going to prank somebody and you call them up, it just rang and you waited.
How about the busy signal? You
Well,
couldn't get hold of them.
all that stuff. Yeah. And, or you'd be, and then you lost interest after 2 phone calls and then nothing happened. But now it's kind of like something comes into our head and we tap it out on our phone and it goes out into the cyber world. And so bullying is so much worse. These rabbit holes are much deeper. And so those wounded kids that we all knew, all those kids who were disconnected or had difficulties at some point, they figured out something, but now they find these places that, feeds that, and now they belong. And the danger of belonging, again, with cell phones, with all of this, the danger of belonging is sometimes you're getting misinformation and you don't have the ability to decipher what's accurate or what's not. With old commercial, what's real or what's Memorex.
I was listening to an interview last night. I think the woman's name is Nicole Wallace. She was interviewing Joan Baez, who was now 85 years old.
I know.
And they had clips of her back when she was in her 20s. Joan Baez was saying, this is the worst of times. This is much worse than the 60s.
Yeah.
And she pointed out that we had the music in the 60s, which we don't have now. People like Joan Baez and others. And we had protests, which we're not having now, or at least not to the same extent. And as bad as the government may have been then, it's nothing compared to how bad it is now. And she doesn't sound very hopeful about how all this is going to turn out. And at like 45-minute interview at the end of it, it was like so sad.
I'm gonna go to that meeting tomorrow. Yeah. I know, I agree. I think there's, and that's why I say it's kind of like this perfect storm of COVID, which isolated us, and the cyber world, which, creates all sorts of information or misinformation, and then people were turning to that. And so that's why the idea of today is we need to turn to people. We need to unite in various ways in any activity to connect, because that helps us feel more empowered, more hopeful, more connected. And that's our path through this.
And following up on that, last night, I was watching Amanpour, who I absolutely love, highly recommend to everybody. All right, so Christiana Amanpour, it's a great reporter, all right? And she was interviewing another reporter who had done a lot of work in Afghanistan. And I had worked with Afghanistan refugees, relocating them to the United States. And then I'm watching Amanpour, and a beautiful thing came out of that sort of connects to what you were saying. They were both talking that as reporters, in the worst of conditions in Afghanistan and in Gaza and in Ukraine, you would find ordinary people who had a sense of humor, who were able to take the worst situations and laugh. So I thought that was so meaningful and hopeful. All right, but my question is this. So now I'm talking to my daughter, which has gone through a horrible divorce. So, I mean, she's in the midst of it. And I said to her about hope, and I shared this. She said, Mom, how can you say it all works out look at what's going on
Right.
in Gaza. Where do you see the hope in?
Mhm.
Well, the way I answer it, and I'm dying to hear your answer, is the way the rest of the world is beginning to come around and say, Palestinians matter. All right? Countries are uniting. That unity that you're talking about, the community. So how do you see those three countries? Gaza, all right, Ukraine,
Mhm.
and Sudan.
Well, what you're talking about is the resilience of the human spirit. And, and uniting together. And that's what we were talking about before, about people, the lower the GDP, the closer the community. And people, again, they find hope in all sorts of different things. And so it's hard for us to conceptualize because we have lights on and we have water and we have all of those things. And so but it's, again, is there this groundswell coming? Are people finally coming out of that torpor, out of that stupor and saying, we need to do something. We need to recognize these countries. And the difficulty a lot of times is we try to Americanize them, which is not helpful because it's like, that's not what they're looking for. And frequently third world countries are much more primitive and much more communal in terms of their approach and less democratic. So to try to make them democratic isn't going to work. So again, do people need help? Absolutely. But to offer help, to see as, that service, to see the need and do what we can to address it. We can't solve the problems necessarily, but we can connect and try to address what's going on or what isn't. And, in some cases say this isn't right. And that's, again, where we come together to not feel hopeless. Hopeless and helpless is a tough place to be, because that's when you don't see a path out. So as long as there's hope and as long as there's help, then human spirit will help us move towards some level of success is probably the wrong word, but some level of better in our lives.
I have two questions and a comment, and that'll be the end for the online questions. Is hope powerful without action?
Forget who said it, but hope springs eternal.
Yeah.
I think hope is powerful, but I think it needs to be interactive. We need, to give hope or to be given hope. We need to, we don't have to become political activists or anything like that. I think think globally, act locally kind of thing, we can act in various ways to help, to connect. And so I think, again, hope comes with connection. Hope comes with community.
Thank you.
And so on that level, that's connection, but it doesn't have to be outside.
Connection is action.
You're right.
Yeah.
Is that
Okay, talk about the particular isolation of young men in our society today. What is happening?
okay? Since I was a young man at one point, I think, well, it's not hard to get that men and women are socialized very differently. And that, if you think about us growing up, girls were given Barbie dolls and tea sets. We're talking a long time ago. We're talking traditional roles. They were given toys and they were given things to share. And they communicated and they, oh, we're having tea, here's your tea. And everybody would sit around and we would do those things. They'd have playtime with their dolls and stuff like that. And we were taught to run into one another. And if you get hurt, don't cry like a girl. And so, so the difficulty, I think, is there's this, what's the definition of a man? And I think, unfortunately, in some ways, that going back to the 50s model of what's going, what they want, 50s model, some people want to go back to what the fifties were, where the man's in charge and the man doesn't have to answer to anything and they can just say, well, I'm not good at that. And they go out and they, they work, they come home and there's nothing else expected of them. So the difficulty is, again, in growing up, we didn't have that in our house, but a lot of families, it's like, what do you expect? He's a guy. Well, boys will be boys. So there weren't the expectations that are frequently that women had addressed. And so I think, and the difficulty also now is there are a lot of single parent families that in some cases, in many, there are a lot of families where fathers are they primarily raise their kids, but more often than not, women are raising the children. And so the kids don't necessarily have good male role models in place. So then they look on the internet and they look on, so what do they see? They see, WWE and all of these, bulked up guys, yelling and screaming. Even the other thing, like a lot of TV, reflects Archie Bunker, All in the Family back then. But then there were fairly recently was Modern Family, where, it's a blended family. There's a gay couple, there's, mixed racial couple, there are all these things. And so it's really confusing. And then when they were told, again, don't feel that way, don't think that way, it becomes harder. And now a show that's on, that's pretty cute, it's called Shifting Gears. And Shifting Gears is about a daughter who comes back, lives with her father. And the guy was a drummer in a band or something, so he traveled around. And there were two teenagers and so the grandfather is kind of raising them. And so he's connecting better with the grandkids than he did with his daughter. And so this disconnect in terms of role models is very difficult right now.
And just a comment, I just watched the Joan Baez interview today also. Her point was that we don't have the social glue that existed in the 1960s. Is that what you found? Yeah.
What's that?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mundhenk. I certainly found it a very inspiring talk. There is hope.
That was the hope.
Thank you. All right. All programs at Glastonbury Abbey are free. However, your donations help us to produce these programs. If you have already donated, we thank you. If you would like to donate, you can scan the. Oh,
I can show you how to do arrows, yeah.
okay. Okay,
That's what
yeah,
you were.
all right, very good. You can.
I got it right.
You can scan you've got many talents.
I got it right.
If you're at home, you may scan the QR code on the screen, or you may click on the red donations button at the upper right-hand corner of the page. Suggested donation is $20. However, any amount is appreciated. Now, a few words about upcoming programs. On Tuesday, October 14th, Father Timothy Joyce will present a program called Faith Seeking Understanding, which is a virtual program. On Thursday, October 16th, the Listening to Other Voices will present Rabbi Shal Held. Judaism is about love. That will be a hybrid program, as is this one tonight. On October 21st and October 28th, we will present a two-part program by Dr. Rogina Beauclair, who will speak on the topic, The Cloister's Apocalypse, a 14th century illumination, Book of Revelation. That will be a virtual program. And on Sunday morning, October 26th, following Mass in the Food for Thought program, it will be my pleasure to give a short talk on an introduction to opera. that will be an in-person program. For more information or to register, please visit the glastonburyabbey.org. Click on programs. And we thank you for joining us tonight. Good night, and we hope to see you again.